Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another Overwatch League fan thoughts and analysis. Today, we will be taking a look at the Paris Eternal. Now, Paris Eternal finished 14th overall in the 2019 season with a record of 11-17 with a minus 21 differential. And they were kind of what I would call the best of the worst teams. 14 and down to me is where it was very clearly like your bottom teams. Then you have kind of your 10 through 13 range, which I would kind of call, I guess, maybe 9 through 13, which I would basically say they were kind of the play-in contenders, and then you have your playoff teams, right? So this is what I would consider, as I said, kind of the best of the worst teams, or best of the rest, I guess, but the Valiant technically would be the best of the rest. Let's take a look at the Paris Eternal, because they made a number of changes in the off-season that really shaped the way their team would look going forward. So, of course, the 2019 Paris Eternal were a team entirely made up of why am I drawing a blank? Of European players from all different parts of Europe. The offseason, they got rid of 4 of those players. They got rid of Shadowburn, Danye, Finzi, and LH Cloudy. So, a Russian player, a Polish player, an Icelandic player, and a Finnish player. They held on to all 4 of their French players, Soon, Nico, GDH, Ben Bess, and Hip, as well as Cruz and Gray. Cruz obviously from the UK and Gray from Portugal. So, moving forward now, we got to take a look at what their team is, and they've made a decent number of changes, and they have essentially changed what their team looks like entirely. So we're going to start by looking at their DPS lineup, and we'll move from there. So DPS, returning, they have Soon and Nico GDH. They bring in XZ, or Chi, or I don't know how you pronounce it, but I'm going to say XZ for now. And Sparkle, both from Element Mystic. So they make a lot of changes to bring in Korean players during the offseason, which of course is a fundamental difference from where this team was in the past. I can tell you that there were a lot of Paris Eternal fans not happy, a lot of xenophobia as a result of that, but we won't talk about that a little more. Paris Eternal bring in some players from Korea, from Element Mystic, mostly. Soon, of course, is your typical hit scan player on this team. Everyone knows Soon very well. Good Widowmaker, good Tracer. Can play some McCree. He and XZ have a very similar hero pool. So the thing that's kind of weird to me is over time, right? XZ might be the player that starts over Soon. Now, I don't know if XZ is better than Soon or not. I think Soon is actually a really good player. I think he's one of those players that is so much better than people realize and people kind of give him credit for. I remember Monte Cristo at one point in time talking about how Soon's Widowmaker wasn't that good, and I laughed because I thought that was just such a stupid take, because when you look at how well he played last season, or in 2019 when he played Widowmaker, and even in 2018, he was very, very good. So I thought that was a bad take, but it is what it is. So I'm curious if XZ will get the start, because XZ's hero pool is Widowmaker and Hanzo and McCree, and he plays snipers, which is what Soon plays. So it'll be interesting to see who plays more between the two. But I have a feeling that we'll be seeing a bit of both. But I have a feeling they're going to try to play as much Soon as possible, because Soon is kind of the face of the team. When it comes to your flex DPS player, Sparkle is going to play as soon as he is able. He's only 17. He won't turn 18 until May 31st. So that's a little less than halfway through the season, I think. It's about halfway through the season. I think like June something is the cutoff for when you have to turn 18. So Sparkle will play once he is old enough to play, and he plays your Doomfist, your Genji, your Pharah. He plays some Hanzo, he plays some Mei. He's a very good player. He's the best player coming out of Korean contenders. But until then, we're going to see a lot of Nico, because Nico plays that same type of DPS role. And Nico was actually very good last season. He actually, I think people gave him some unnecessary hate, but he was actually very good. And he played well, and I think he'll be a good player for this team going forward. I don't have any doubts in his abilities, but part of that makes me think we might see Nico soon as the damage dealers for a good portion of the season before Sparkle becomes eligible to play, and then we'll start seeing the transition to Sparkle soon, Sparkle XE type thing. That's really where I am, but we're going to see some of these Korean players get playtime, and because the coaching staff is Rush and 9K and Aid and Levi. Rush obviously coming from the Element Mystic squad that they have added a bunch of players for. I wouldn't be surprised if we see the Korean players start for the most part, just because he knows those players very well. But you know, the coaching staff is very good. I think it's a very good coaching staff. It's one of the better coaching staffs in the league. When you bring in 9K and Rush and Levi, that's really good, and you bring in Aid as just to kind of, you know, wrap it up. This is going to be a team that I think could be really good, but the problem is they have to be good before Sparkle is able to play in order to really compete. Let's move on now to the tank line. They have Benbest, No Smite, Smex, and Hanbin. Now, Benbest, of course, comes back from last season, one of the French players. I think he was not very good last season. I was not really impressed with the way Benbest played. Wasn't really impressed with the way LH Cloudy played either, but I was especially not impressed with it. And when they originally made their roster announcements, they hadn't announced them signing another main tank. And I knew they had to sign another one. There was no way they weren't signing another one, because this team would have been bad. And I mean bad if Benbest was their main tank. I just don't think he was that great. I think he struggled throughout the season last season, and I think they needed to bring someone else in. They brought in, for that position, No Smite. Of course, formerly of the Hangzhou Spark and Billy Gaming. And what's interesting about No Smite is, you know, he was brought in originally basically because he had played with on X6. He had that history playing with a lot of the teammates that ended up becoming part of Hangzhou Spark, and of course, one of his main things was that he was used to playing alongside, you know, Godsby and Bebe and Rhea, right? So the flex tank and the main tank had history playing together, so it worked. But then, of course, Gushui was the better player. Gushui got a lot more playtime because he was an incredible player and one of the best players in the league, and I don't think you could really be like, he wasn't all that great, when he was actually insane, and he was a very good player, and, you know, that's just kind of what happened. So, No Smite was I would say, an Overwatch League caliber player, but because he was, you know, with Gushui, you know, he wasn't going to be playing as often. And the other thing with No Smite is, when he was in versus when Gushui was in, you know, early in the season, you could tell that the reason why No Smite was playing more is because there was a communication problem with Gushui and the rest of the Korean roster. But as the season progressed, and as Gushui and the rest of the roster were able to communicate better, it was night and day. And you could even tell before that happened that the team was better when Gushui was playing, but they made more mistakes because of Gushui's inability to communicate well with the teammates. So they bring in No Smite. He'll probably be their starting main tank, I would imagine. I don't think Benbest is that good. I think he's going to have to be their starter when the season comes around. You're going to pair him, I think, with a lot of Korean players. You're going to pair him probably with Hanbin, who is coming from Element Mystic as well. Now, the problem with Hanbin is he turns 18 February 20th. Now, I don't know if pairs don't even play a game before February 20th, to be completely honest with you. So that's should be noted, as they may not even play a game before then. So they likely play alongside him. They do have one other flex tank player, which is Smex, who they signed this off season. He's a UK player, so he's not a Korean player. So it looks like for a lot of it, they still want to have like a bunch of players that are backups because they're like, yeah, that's super important to us, and we need backup players. The Paris Eternal do play a game before the 20th. They play the first week in New York. So they play Toronto and London, and then they do not play another game before the 20th. So they play a game the 22nd and the 20th. Nope, not they. So they will play 2 games before that time. So we will see some Smex at least in the first week, as he'll be old enough to play, and obviously Hanbin will not. So I don't expect Smex to play a lot throughout the season, but we'll see him at least a little bit that first week because he's the only one that will be able to play, and I think he'll be fine. I think Smex is a player who has played pretty well. He was on the UK World Cup team and has looked pretty good. He might get some playtime even when Hanbin's old enough to play, but maybe not. I don't really know. I feel like the fact that they basically waited this long before they signed a flex tank shows they really don't have a lot of plans to play someone other than Hanbin, but they just have to play somebody before Hanbin's old enough to play. So I'd expect Hanbin to be the guy who plays for the season once he's old enough. But once again, Hanbin coming from Element Mystic, very good player, very strong player. I think he'll be just fine. I don't really think their tank line is going to be a problem with No Smite Hanbin. I think that's going to be one of those things that this team actually does really well at. Final thing is their support line. The support line is the only part of the team that does not have any Korean players. They have Cruz in their main support role, who I think is just fine. I said that makes it sound worse than he really is. I think Cruz is a very good main support. He's a very good shot caller. He's a very good leader for this team. We saw in the way that he would come with this team last season and the way that he would play for this team last season. He's a very emotional player. He clearly gives it his all, and he's a very good player. He's been around forever. He's just a really good player, and I think he will be a very good part of this team as their main support player. For their flex supports, they have Hip and they have Gray. Hip, of course, is a French player. Gray is the Portuguese player. And this is the interesting team to follow because they are very interesting in the fact that they're very similar in the way they play. But Gray seems to get more playtime late in the season last season. They're very similar. And I think it really just depends on communication. They're very similar. I personally thought Gray was better throughout the season. From what I saw, I thought he was overall just a player who performed a little bit better than Hip did. But like I said, it was very close. It wasn't like one was really, really good and one wasn't that good. Like, they're very close in the way that they played. So I don't really expect us to really see either one of these two like excel more than the other one will. I think they'll both get playtime. Sideshow, I was watching one of his videos, and he had a very interesting point. When they're playing, they're almost always guaranteed to have a French player on the field. They're going to always want to have at least one French player playing, which is why Hip will probably get a lot of playtime, because if you have No Smite and Hanbin as your tanks and Sparkle and XZ as your DPS, you have to have Hip if you want to have a French player playing at any given moment. So I think that was a decent point and probably could happen. There's definitely a chance that is something that happens for this team. I don't know. We'll have to see, but it'll be interesting to see. I think this team looks pretty good. They look a lot better than what they did last season. Once again, the problem that this team has, as I mentioned with a lot of other teams, is they're going to have to compete in a division that is somewhat difficult. I think Paris, when I look at that division right now, I think Paris is the third best team in the Atlantic North. I think they look better than London, though that's pretty close, I think. I think they look better than Boston. I don't think they look better than Toronto or New York. And maybe I'll be wrong, but the problem that the Paris Eternal are going to have is by the end of the season, they could be one of the best teams. They could be the Washington Justice of last season or the Atlanta Reign of last season, where they just have a massive, they're always in that like middle of the, well, Washington Justice not so much, But like the Atlanta Reign, they were kind of just like a middle of the pack team the whole season until the very end when they just went on a massive winning streak. They won 9 in a row, made the playoffs. Didn't even have to make the play-ins; they made the playoffs. Got that upset over San Francisco. They could be that kind of team once Sparkle is eligible to play, but they have to be able to stay competitive without Sparkle, so that when Sparkle comes in, they can just kind of dominate. But the problem is, and this is something we've seen in the past. You look up at like Decay from last season. Decay was the most sought after player in the 2019 build up, and what ended up happening, in my opinion, is Decay was an okay player. He was good. He wasn't the best DPS player on that team. I think Surefour was still the better DPS player on that team. So you wonder if maybe bringing in someone like Sparkle to this team that isn't a fully Korean roster, maybe he doesn't perform as well. No, he has the same head coach, which is definitely something that's different from most. Most players don't get their head coach that they had played with in contenders. It also makes this a very attractive team for Korean players to go to if they want to, because you can go and you can play for this guy who is Element Mystic, but the Paris Eternal clearly still want to keep their European identity as much as they can. Yes, they want to be able to compete, and they're going to bring in Korean players because Korean players are very good, but they also, you can tell just from looking at their team, want to keep a lot of European players on this roster. So this is an interesting team. I think they could be good. They're in that middle of the pack to me, maybe slightly better than what they finished last season as, but I think their division's really tough, and I think the Pacific Conference is really good as a whole, that they might struggle to get those wins. And I think the Atlantic Division has had some really improved teams. Toronto, Philadelphia, Atlanta still looks really good, and they've improved still. Washington could be good. They might be on the same level as this team. Florida might be on the same level as this team. So there's these teams that they're going to have to play a lot. And Houston and Paris, to me, has done stuff to make themselves better, but they have to be able to compete early in the season so that when Sparkle is able to play, that they're able to compete and make it into the playoffs. I don't know if we are at that point yet with what the Paris Eternal have done when you compare it to what has also happened with all of the other teams around them. So I think the Paris Eternal look better than last season. They were a very mediocre team last season. They went 3-4 in 3 of the 4 stages and 2-5 in the other one. But it's a matter of, can they make that final push? Can they be a playoff team? Can they be a play-in team? I think their goal should be to shoot for the playoffs. But this is a team that I could see competing for a spot in the play-in tournament. But I don't know if I would put them as a serious contender. Like, technically last season, like, they were only 2 spots out of the play-in tournament, but they were never really a contender to get into the play-in tournament. But I think next season they have a shot at actually competing to get into that play-in tournament. But that's it for me today. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Paris Eternal down below. I think they're a very interesting team, and I think what you would have to say and your thoughts on them would be really cool. But I'm going to get out of here. So thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, consider liking and subscribing. Hope you all have a wonderful day. Hope you all have a wonderful week. I'll see you all next time. Yeah. Bye-bye.